Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into a world you probably can't even imagine. A time before your phone blares, before your smart speaker politely chimes, before even a clunky, ticking alarm clock rudely jolts you awake. Okay, picture this. You're snuggled deep under a mountain of scratchy wool blankets, the kind that feel like they weigh more than you do. The pre-dawn chill seeping through the cracks in the walls of your tiny, drafty room. Outside, the world is still cloaked in an inky, silent darkness, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl or the rustle of some unseen creature. There's no soft glow from a street lamp, no hum of a refrigerator, just darkness and the quiet breath of the sleeping town. Now, imagine needing to be up by a certain hour, a very specific hour, and having absolutely none of the modern marvels we take for granted. You're on your own, buddy. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins with a truly fascinating character, one who, if they existed today, would probably be an Instagram influencer specializing in vintage wake-up calls. I'm talking about the knocker-upper. Yes, that was their actual job title. You see, before the ubiquitous alarm clock became a household item, especially during the Industrial Revolution, when people needed to be at factories at precise times, someone had to quite literally knock you awake. Imagine you're an early 19th century mill worker. Your shift starts before dawn, maybe 5 a.m. You don't have a clock. Your windows might be small, and the sun certainly isn't up. How do you get to work on time? You hire a knocker-upper. This person, often an older man or woman, would patrol the streets in the pre-dawn hours, carrying a long pole, sometimes made of bamboo, sometimes a lighter, hollow tube. At the end of this pole was often a small, weighted knob, or even just a piece of metal. Their job: to tap on your window, or if you were on a higher floor, to tap the upper windows until you opened your eyes. No snooze button here. No. Gentle vidine of light. It's the relentless, rhythmic tap. Tap, tap against your glass, or sometimes it's a sharp rap on your door. This wasn't always a pleasant experience, mind you. Imagine the sheer dedication, or perhaps the desperate need for a few pennies that drove these individuals. They had to remember dozens, sometimes hundreds of addresses, the exact wake-up times for each resident, and then perform their duty in all kinds of weather: rain, sleet, snow, biting winds. The knocker-upper was out there ensuring the workforce dragged itself out of bed. Historians still argue whether the knocker-upper was a truly independent trade, or if it was often a side gig for people like watchmen or even milkmen who were already out and about at those ungodly hours. Now, you might think, well, what if they just tapped once and then moved on? Oh no, my friend, these were professionals. They wouldn't leave until they saw a light come on, heard a window open, or received some other clear signal that their client was indeed awake. Some knocker-uppers even carried a pea shooter, launching dried peas at upper floor windows to create a particularly jarring, annoying noise. Imagine that, just when you're drifting back into a lovely dream, thwack, a pea hit your window pane. It's enough to make you leap out of bed, probably with a few choice words for your dedicated, pea-slinging alarm. It was an essential, if unglamorous, service, especially in industrial towns where punctuality meant the difference between a day's wages and a lost job. You really didn't want to oversleep. A fun tidbit: in some areas, the knocker-upper would even have a regular clientele who would leave a small payment, perhaps a few pennies or a piece of bread, on their windowsill for the knocker-upper to collect. It was a simple, trust-based system built on the shared understanding that time even without clocks, marches on, and work needed to begin. So, you've been rattled awake by the determined tapping of your friendly neighborhood knocker-upper, perhaps, still half asleep and grumbling about those pesky dried peas. You stumble out of bed, the pre-dawn chill biting at your exposed skin, and begin to prepare for your workday. But as you emerge from your home, the quiet of the early morning is soon broken by another distinct sound. One that signals not just the passage of time, but also the unfolding of the day's news and happenings. You hear it before you see it, the rhythmic clang of a bell, followed by a voice, clear and resonant, cutting through the stillness. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. The voice booms, echoing down the cobbled street. This, my sleepy friend, is the town crier, an essential figure in communities long before newspapers were common, and certainly before the incessant dinging of your phone informed you of every minor event. The town crier wasn't just a news disseminator. They were a living, breathing, walking alarm clock for the entire community. Their presence in the early morning was an announcement. The day has begun. And here's what you need to know. Imagine you're standing at your doorway, shivering slightly, watching this figure approach, dressed often in a distinctive livery, a tricorn hat, a coat, and breeches. Perhaps they carried their brass handbell, which they'd ring vigorously to gather attention. Once they had a crowd, or at least a few bleary-eyed citizens. They'd unrolled their parchment scroll and began to shout out proclamations, local ordinances, market prices, and even advertisements for goods and services. By order of the mayor, all merchants shall set their stalls by the third bell, or lost a piebald sow near the old oak tree. Reward offered. This wasn't just a job, it was a performance. A good town crier needed a powerful voice, excellent diction, and the stamina to traverse the entire town, repeating their messages at various junctions. They were the original broadcasters, and their early morning rounds were a crucial part of the daily rhythm. Historians still argue whether the primary role of the town crier shifted over time from purely official announcements to incorporating more commercial news as towns grew and commerce flourished. It's a fascinating debate about the evolution of information dissemination. The town crier's bell then served a dual purpose. For those who relied on them, it was an explicit wake-up call, a clear signal that the day had truly begun and it was time to join the bustling life of the community. For others, already awake, it was a reminder of the order of things, a confirmation that the world was indeed turning as it should. It was a shared experience, a collective moment of awakening, unlike the isolated, personal experience of a modern alarm. You didn't just hear the news. You were part of the audience, often exchanging greetings or quick remarks with neighbors who had also gathered. Think about the sheer practicalities. The town crier had to know their routes and timings impeccably. They were often paid by the announcement, so efficiency and reach were key, and they were trusted. In an era without widespread literacy, the crier was often the only source of reliable information. Imagine the chaos if the crier overslept. The entire town's schedule could be thrown off. The market might open late, vital announcements might be missed, and general confusion could reign. It was a job that demanded discipline and a strong sense of responsibility. It's often passed down through generations within a family. I bet some of them had a signature bell-ringing style, too. You know, like how some people have a signature cough. That's old Mildred. Guess the fish market's open. It wasn't just about waking up individuals. It was about waking up the collective consciousness of the town, initiating the daily grind, and setting the tone for the hours ahead. The clanging bell and booming voice were the auditory heartbeats of the pre-industrial town. It's a soundscape utterly alien to our silent, smart-deviced mornings. You've been roused, perhaps by the insistent tap-tap-tap of a knocker-upper, or by the bell and booming voice of the town crier announcing the day's events. The collective awakening of the town is now underway. But as you look out your window, the world is still shrouded in a lingering pre-dawn gloom. The sun hasn't quite dared to show its face, and yet there's a flicker, a growing glow down the street. It's not the electric hum of modern streetlights, nor the gentle illumination of a well-lit suburb. No, this light is warmer, more intimate. It comes courtesy of another crucial figure in the pre-alarm clock world, the lamplighter. Imagine this scene, a silhouette against a still, dark sky, moving methodically from one street lamp to the next. In one hand, they carry a long pole, often tipped with a wick or a flame, and in the other, perhaps a small ladder or a bottle of oil. Their job, as the name suggests, was to light the gas or oil lamps that provided the only artificial illumination on the streets. But their role wasn't just about chasing away the night's shadows. Their presence in the early morning was a subtle yet powerful signal as the lamplighter made their rounds, extinguishing the lamps that had glowed through the night. They were, in effect, performing a reverse wake-up call. The diminishing light wasn't a direct command to rise, but it was an undeniable sign that dawn was approaching, but the working day was already in motion for some, and that soon the natural light would take over. It was a visual cue, a fading signal that indicated the end of the nocturnal shift and the commencement of the diurnal hustle. Think about the sheer dedication required for this job. Lamplighters had to be intimately familiar with their routes, navigating dark, often uneven streets, carrying potentially flammable materials. They had to ensure every lamp was properly extinguished to conserve fuel and prevent hazards. Days and day did this in all weathers, the same biting winds and driving rain that the knocker-uppers endured. Historians still argue about the exact timing of their rounds in relation to sunrise. Were they extinguishing lamps precisely at dawn, or were there regional variations depending on the town's energy conservation efforts or the lamplighter's specific contract? It's a nuanced point that speaks to the logistical complexities of a pre-electrical world. A quirky tidbit for you: in some of the wealthier districts, lamplighters might even have had specific arrangements with residents. Perhaps a gentleman wanted his street lamp to remain lit a little longer for a late-night guest, or a shop owner wanted their storefront illuminated early to attract customers. The lamplighter, then, wasn't just a municipal employee, They were a community service provider, offering bespoke illumination services for a few extra shillings. It sounds like something out of a Dickens novel, doesn't it? Excuse me, good sir, could you perhaps delay the extinguishing of the lamp outside my humble abode by a quarter hour? It's a subtle click and hiss as a lamp was put out, the faint smell of oil or gas lingering in the air. The gradual brightening of the sky as natural light asserted itself. These were the sensory cues that replaced our modern digital displays. You didn't need to check the weather app. It's the dampness in the air and the lingering mist told you everything. You didn't need a sunrise alarm. The lamplighter's retreating glow and the subtle shift in ambient light were your indicators. This job also highlights the interconnectedness of these odd jobs. The knocker-upper woke the individual, the town crier woke the community with news, and the lamplighter provided the changing backdrop of light and shadow, marking the very boundaries of night and day. It was a beautiful, almost poetic rhythm, entirely reliant on human effort and observation, rather than silicon chips and glowing screens. It truly was a different pace of life, where the environment and the dedicated work of individuals dictated the flow of time. The gentle fading of the lamplighter's glow marks the true beginning of the workday, especially as we move into an era of booming industry. You've had your personalized wake-up call, maybe heard the news, and now, as you trudge towards the heart of the town, a new sound begins to dominate the pre-dawn soundscape. It's not a gentle tapping, nor a melodious bell, but something far more insistent. more commanding, and utterly uninjurable. The factory whistle. Imagine the transition from the quiet, almost personal rhythm of the knocker-upper in the town crier to the deafening collective blast of steam. This was the sound of the Industrial Revolution, the unmistakable roar of progress, and for millions, it was the ultimate, non-negotiable alarm clock. As factories grew, employing hundreds, even thousands of workers, the idea of individual knocker-uppers became impractical. A centralized, powerful signal was needed to ensure entire shifts arrived on time, especially with the intricate dance of machinery and production lines. The factory whistle, typically powered by the same steam engines that drove the machinery inside the mills and factories, would let out a piercing shriek that could be heard for miles around. It wasn't just loud, it was designed to penetrate the densest fogs, the thickest walls, and the deepest sleeps. Often, there would be a series of blasts, a long, mournful wail signaling 30 minutes before the shift, a shorter, sharper blast for 15 minutes, and then the final ear-splitting scream indicating the precise moment work was to begin. No questions asked, no excuses. For the factory worker, the whistle was a stern master. It dictated the rhythm of their entire lives, not just their waking moments. Your meal breaks, the end of your shift, even paydays, all were often marked by the whistle's call. It was a tool of efficiency, a testament to the new, mechanized world where time was money, and every minute of productivity counted. You didn't just wake up, you were commanded to wake up, along with everyone else in your district. Let's say, shared, albeit often grudging, experience. Historians still argue about the precise impact of the factory whistle on community life. Did it erode traditional, more organic forms of timekeeping, like church bells or sunrise? Or did it simply provide a necessary adaptation to a new economic reality, effectively synchronizing the lives of a growing urban workforce? It's a fascinating question about the intersection of technology and societal norms. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some factory owners, keen to ensure maximum punctuality, would actually install multiple whistles of varying tones or even orchestrate a kind of whistle symphony to make their factory's call distinctive. Imagine trying to sleep through a cacophony of steam-powered wind instruments. It sounds like a bad dream, frankly. And if you lived near a particularly large factory, you might hear not just your own shift's whistle, but the whistles for multiple shifts throughout the day and night, essentially eliminating true silence. You could literally set your personal clock by the blasts. The factory whistle was a symbol of power, the power of industry, the power of employers, and the undeniable power of punctuality in the modern age. It was a harsh, impersonal alarm, a far cry from the human touch of the knocker-upper or the community spirit of the town crier, but it was undeniably effective. It pulled people from their beds, whether they liked it or not, and propelled them into the relentless churn of the industrial machine. It was loud, it was clear, and it tolerated no dissent. Section 5. So, you've survived the industrial cacophony of the factory whistle, a sound that certainly left no room for lingering dreams. But long before the relentless steam-powered shriek, and even alongside it, another pervasive sound shaped the waking hours of countless communities: the church bells. For centuries, in towns and villages across the globe, the peal of the church bell wasn't just a summons to worship. It was the rhythmic heartbeat of daily life, sacred alarm clock for the masses. Imagine waking not to a harsh, mechanical blare, but to the deep, resonant thrum of bells carrying on the crisp morning air. These weren't just random tolls. Churches often had specific bell-ringing patterns that signified different times or events. The first faint chimes might announce the approach of dawn, a softer call for contemplation, for preparing for the day ahead. Then, perhaps a more insistent, robust peal would signal the hour for the first daily mass, or simply the time for general activity to begin. For many, especially in agrarian societies, the church bell was the most reliable timekeeper they had. You couldn't check your wrist, and certainly not your phone. So you listened to the bells. This was a profoundly communal way of waking up. Everyone in the village or town, regardless of their profession or social standing, was subject to the same auditory cues. The baker heard it as he prepared his ovens, the farmer as he tended to his livestock, the merchant as he readied his wares. It created a shared sense of time, a collective rhythm that bound the community together. Historians still argue whether the church's role as a timekeeper was primarily an ecclesiastical function that naturally bled into secular life, or if it was a deliberate strategy to reinforce the church's central position in the community. It's a fascinating look at the intertwined nature of faith and daily existence. Quirky tidbit: some churches had incredibly elaborate bell-ringing traditions with specific sequences or changes that required skilled campanologists, bell ringers, to perform. These patterns could be incredibly complex, almost like musical scores. Their exact timing would indicate not just the hour, but perhaps even the day of the week or a special feast day. Imagine a new apprentice bell ringer trying to learn all those sequences. One wrong pull, and you might accidentally announce a wedding during a funeral service, or worse. Tell everyone it's noon when it's actually 6 a.m. The consequences might not be dire, but they'd certainly be embarrassing. The deep vibrations of the bells would travel through the ground, through the very foundations of the homes, providing a physical as well as an auditory wake-up call. It wasn't just a sound. It was a sensation. You might feel the reverberations in your chest as you slowly came to consciousness, a gentle reminder that the world was stirring. And unlike the sharp, sudden jolt of a modern alarm, the bells often offered a more gradual, almost meditative awakening, allowing you to slowly transition from sleep to wakefulness. The church bells also offered a sense of continuity. Generations had woken to the same sounds, the same patterns. It was a comforting, timeless ritual, connecting you to those who came before and those who would follow, in a world of much less certainty and change. The unwavering constancy of the bells provided a foundational structure to the day. So, while the factory whistle screamed of a new industrial age, the church bell hummed with the echoes of centuries past, reminding everyone that while times might change, some things, like the rhythm of dawn, remained eternal. The solemn peal of the church bells fades into the background, a comforting hum rather than a jarring clang. But as you step out, another chorus begins to rise with the sun, one far more ancient than any man-made bell or whistle. You hear the rustle in the trees, the faint scratching from the chicken coop, and then, unmistakable, a triumphant, crowing call that sends shivers down your spine, or at least makes you roll your eyes in sleepy annoyance. Welcome to the world of animal alarms, where your feathered and furry friends were often your most reliable, if not always polite. Wake-up calls. Before humanity invented clever mechanisms or organized societal wake-up calls, nature provided its own kata. The most famous, of course, is the rooster. This feathered tyrant of the barnyard doesn't just crow when the sun is up. He crows before the sun is up. Often, he'll start his enthusiastic vocalizations an hour or more before dawn. It's almost as if he's reminding the sun that it's time to get to work. And he doesn't just crow once. Oh no, he crows repeatedly with increasing urgency until the world is bathed in light. For farmers, this was invaluable. You didn't need a clock to know when to start milking the cows or tending the fields. Your rooster was your living, breathing, clucking alarm. But it wasn't just roosters. Think about other animals that are naturally early risers or have distinct morning habits. Geese, for example, are famously noisy and territorial. Their honking and hissing could easily rouse a sleeping household, especially if their coop was near the living quarters. Dogs, too, with their keen sense of hearing, might bark at the first hint of movement or light, acting as impromptu guardians in alarm systems. Even the gentle lowing of cows or the bleating of sheep, signaling their readiness for milking, could stir a farmer from their slumber. Historians still argue whether the domestication of some animals was partly driven by their continuous utility as natural timekeepers, or if this function was merely a convenient byproduct. It's a fascinating thought. Did early humans subconsciously select for animals that were good at waking them up? A quirky tidbit: in some ancient cultures, people would even rely on specific insects or birds that had predictable morning calls. Imagine setting your internal clock by the first chirp of a robin or the insistent buzz of a particular beetle. It wasn't always as precise as a modern alarm, but it tuned people into the subtle rhythms of nature, creating a much deeper connection to their environment. Of course, this also meant if your rooster was having an off day or your geese decided to sleep in, you might be in for a rough morning. There was no reset button on these biological alarms. The beauty of these animal alarms was their organic simplicity. They didn't require winding, fuel, or maintenance beyond feeding and caring for the animals themselves. They were entirely integrated into the daily cycle of farm life. You woke when the animals woke, and their needs often dictated the immediate tasks of your day. It was a symbiotic relationship. You cared for them, and in return, they helped you manage your time. This reliance on animal behavior also highlights a profound difference in the human relationship with time. It wasn't an abstract concept measured by gears and springs. It was tied directly to the observable world around you. You lived by the sun, by the seasons, and by the instincts of the creatures that shared your living space. So, the next time your phone gently wakes you with a pre-selected melody, spare a thought for the poor souls who had to contend with a grumpy goose or an overzealous rooster. Their wake-up calls might have been less predictable, but they were undeniably more natural. You've heard the earthy, primal calls of the animal kingdom acting as nature's alarm, to stark contrast to the precise industrial whistle or the spiritual chime of church bells. But what if you lived in a time when even the most basic understanding of gears and springs was centuries away, and you still needed a way to mark the passage of time, especially for that crucial morning awakening? This is where human ingenuity, coupled with a deep understanding of natural forces, truly shines. Enter the fascinating world of water clocks. Imagine living in ancient Egypt, Greece, or China thousands of years ago. Sundials were great for sunny days, but what about the night or cloudy days? The solution lay in a steady, undeniable flow of water. A water clock, or clepsydra, as it was known by the Greeks, wasn't just a device for telling time. Some ingenious versions were designed to wake you up, albeit in a rather elaborate and sometimes clumsy fashion. At its simplest, a water clock involved two containers. Water would drip at a carefully controlled rate from an upper vessel into a lower one. Markings on the lower vessel would indicate the passage of hours as the water level rose. But for a wake-up function, things got a bit more complicated, and frankly, a lot more fun. Some ancient water clocks were designed with floating mechanisms inside the receiving vessel. As the water level rose, a float would lift, eventually triggering a lever. This lever could then activate a variety of alarms. It might release a small number of bronze balls that would drop onto a metal gong, creating a gentle clink-clunk sound. Or, more dramatically, it could trigger the release of a weighted object, perhaps a small stone that would fall into a basin, creating a splash. Imagine being woken by a series of tiny cannonballs dropping into a bucket next to your bed. That certainly would get your attention, though perhaps not in the most soothing way. Historians still argue about the widespread adoption of these more complex, alarm-equipped water clocks. Were they practical for the average citizen, or largely curiosities confined to the wealthy, scholarly, or monastic communities where precise timekeeping was crucial for astronomical observations or prayer schedules? It's a good question, given the effort involved in maintaining them. You couldn't just set it and forget it. Quirky tidbit: one of the most sophisticated ancient water clocks was designed by Eusebius of Alexandria in the 3rd century BCE. His clepsydra not only told time, but had a sophisticated system of gears and even human figures that would point to the hours. And for the alarm function, it could cause pebbles to drop onto a gong, or even open a valve to cause a trumpet-like sound. Imagine waking up to the ancient equivalent of a brass band, all powered by dripping water. Testament to the incredible engineering minds of the past, working without the benefit of microchips or even proper springs. The challenge with water clocks was accuracy. The flow rate of water could be affected by temperature, humidity, and even the cleanliness of the water itself. A small blockage could throw off the entire timing. So, while conceptually brilliant, they required constant monitoring and recalibration. You'd need to refill the top reservoir daily, clean out any sediment, and probably pray that no curious mice decided to build a nest in the delicate mechanisms. So, while not as ubiquitous as the rooster, these water-powered wonders provided a glimpse into humanity's ceaseless quest for precise timekeeping and the ability to control their waking hours. Long before the simple convenience of a wind-up clock became available, they truly represent a blend of scientific understanding and artistic craftsmanship. It's all in the service of getting you out of bed. From the intricate dripping mechanisms of water clocks, we now turn to an even simpler, yet surprisingly effective method of keeping time and, more importantly, waking up: the candle clock. Imagine a time when electricity was a distant dream, and even mechanical clocks were rare and expensive luxuries. How do you measure the hours of the night and ensure you rise at a specific time using only the simplest of materials? You turn to the steady, predictable burn of a candle. The concept is beautifully straightforward. A candle, typically marked with equidistant lines, would burn down at a relatively consistent rate. Each line represented a specific unit of time, an hour, for instance. By observing how far the candle had burned, you could estimate the time. But how do you turn this into an alarm clock? This is where human ingenuity and a little bit of noise comes in. The trick was to embed small, metallic objects, often nails, but sometimes ball bearings or even small stones at specific points along the length of the candle. As the candle slowly melted down, the flame would eventually reach a nail. The heat would loosen the nail from the wax, causing it to drop with a distinct clink or plunk into a metal basin or a ceramic dish placed directly beneath the candle. Imagine the quiet of the night, punctuated by that sudden metallic sound echoing in your room. It was certainly enough to rouse a light sleeper, or at least shift you closer to wakefulness. You could set your alarm by deciding how many hours you wanted to sleep. Okay, if you needed to be up in 4 hours, you'd simply embed a nail at the 4-hour mark. It was a manual, low-tech, but remarkably reliable system, especially for those who couldn't afford anything more sophisticated. And unlike a water clock, it required very little maintenance beyond lighting the candle. Historians still argue about the exact prevalence of candle clocks as personal alarm systems. Were they common household items or primarily used by scholars, monks, or watchmen who needed to mark specific nocturnal hours for prayer or duty? The lack of surviving examples makes it a tricky historical puzzle. A quirky tidbit: King Alfred the Great of Wessex, a historical figure from the 9th century, is famously credited with inventing, or at least popularizing, the candle clock. He reportedly used them to manage his rigorous schedule of prayer, study, and governance, dividing his day into precise intervals. Now, whether he used the nail-dropping method for alarms is debated, but the concept was certainly in play. Imagine being a king, ruling a realm, and your main timekeeping device is a piece of wax with some nails in it. Humble beginnings, indeed. The downsides: well, a draft could make your candle burn faster or slower, throwing off your timing. The quality of the wax also played a role. Some candles burned more consistently than others. Of course, there was the inherent fire risk. You had an open flame in your bedroom, often near flammable materials. Not exactly ideal by modern safety standards. But for those times, it was an effective solution. The candle clock represents a different philosophy of time. It wasn't about instant digital precision, but about the slow, tangible consumption of time, marked by light turning to darkness, and then, with a simple clink, signaling the dawn of a new waking period. It's a quiet testament to human ingenuity in adapting to the world's needs with whatever resources were at hand. You've heard of the ingenious devices, okay? The dedicated people, and even the noisy animals that served as alarm clocks. Now, let's strip away all the human invention and animal husbandry and consider, perhaps, the most ancient, universal, and gentle wake-up call of all, the pre-industrial dawn chorus. This wasn't a job for any person or a function of any device. It was the world itself, slowly, melodically, stirring from its slumber. Imagine yourself living deep in the countryside, far from the industrial clamor or the bells of the nearest town. Your windows are thin, perhaps just a wooden shutter, and the air is still cool with the lingering breath of night. There's no artificial light, no distant hum of traffic. Hey, the faintest hint of gray begins to bleed into the eastern sky. A new sound begins. It's subtle at first, perhaps a single chirp, then another, tentative and soft. Soon, it swells. This is the dawn chorus, the synchronized symphony of birds awakening. Different species contribute at different times, creating layers of sound. The robins might start, followed by the thrushes, then the warblers and sparrows, each bird following its own internal clock, and the subtle shift in light levels adds its voice to the growing crescendo. It's a natural phenomenon, a biological alarm clock that has been operating for millions of years, long before humanity ever dreamed of punctuality. For agrarian societies, for anyone living close to nature, this was often the primary signal of morning. You didn't need to check a device. You felt the rising light, and you heard the world around you come alive. This wasn't a sudden jolt, but a gradual, organic transition from deep sleep to wakefulness. The escalating birdsong was a gentle nudge, a melodic invitation to join the waking world. You might slowly become aware of it, drift for a few more minutes, and then, as the chorus reached its peak, you'd know it was truly time to rise. Historians still argue about the precise impact of urban development and artificial light on human perception of these natural rhythms. Did city dwellers lose this innate connection to the dawn chorus, relying instead on man-made signals? Or did a version of it persist, albeit muffled, even in bustling towns? It's a fascinating question about how our environment shapes our sensory experience of time. A quirky tidbit: scientists have found that the specific order and timing of birds joining the dawn chorus can vary based on factors like species, location, and even light pollution. Some birds, known as early birds, go figure, actually have larger eyes relative to their body size, allowing them to see better in very low light and thus start singing earlier. So, your pre-industrial alarm clock was actually a highly sophisticated, biologically programmed instrument, constantly recalibrating itself based on environmental conditions. Pretty cool for something you probably took for granted. This method of awakening speaks to a profound connection with the natural world, teamed that many of us have lost in our electrically lit, digitally timed lives. There's no harshness, no demand, just the gentle, escalating serenade of life itself. It's a reminder that before we tried to conquer time with technology, we simply listened to its subtle whispers and responded to its natural cues. Highlights a slower, more deliberate pace of life, where the sun wasn't just a source of light, but the ultimate conductor of the day's symphony. You've drifted awake with the sweet sounds of the dawn chorus, or perhaps with the rhythmic clang of a candle clock's falling nail. But now, as the pre-dawn deepens into true morning, especially in bustling towns and cities, another figure emerges from the lingering shadows, a sentinel of the night whose duties often bled into the early hours of the day. The watchman. Imagine you're living in a medieval European town or an early modern city. Crime wasn't tracked by fancy CCTV cameras, and streetlights were non-existent or scarce, so communities relied on watchmen. These individuals, often armed with a lantern, a cudgel, and sometimes a horn, patrolled the streets during the dark hours. Their primary job was to maintain order, prevent fires, catch criminals, and generally be the eyes and ears of the community while everyone else slept. But their role wasn't purely nocturnal. As dawn approached, the watchman's duties often shifted, transforming them into an unwitting, or sometimes quite deliberate, communal alarm. They would call out the hours as they passed, 4 o'clock, and all's well, voices echoing through the quiet streets. This chant, repeated regularly, served as a reassurance to those awake and a gentle, rhythmic nudge to those still slumbering. You might hear their heavy footfalls on the cobbles, the clink of their lantern, and then their booming call, a human clock announcing the progression of the night for people who needed to be up early for market, for travel, or for specific labor. The watchman's call was a valuable, audible indicator of the approaching day. You didn't need a fancy device. You just needed to listen for the familiar voice and the declared hour. It was a shared experience, much like the town crier, but even more integrated into the nocturnal fabric of the town. Historians still argue whether the watchman's wake-up function was a formal part of their job description or an informal, beneficial byproduct of their hourly calls. It's a subtle but interesting distinction in understanding historical labor. Roll's a quirky tidbit. Some watchmen were known to have incredibly distinctive voices, or even specific melodies they'd chant with their hourly calls. Imagine being able to tell which watchman was on duty just by the timbre of their all's well. It's almost like a medieval podcast, but live and in person, and probably far less entertaining than your favorite true crime saga. And if you happen to be a grumpy sleeper, you might have muttered a few choice words under your breath about their lack of quiet enthusiasm, beyond just calling the hour. The watchman might also be the first to spot the earliest risers, the bakers heading to their ovens, the milkmaids with their pails, the farmers bringing in their produce. Their presence visually confirmed that the night was indeed fading, and the working world was slowly reawakening. They were a bridge between the sleeping world and the stirring one, serving the transition and marking it with their vocal pronouncements. The watchman's role highlights the human reliance on other humans for basic functions. We now delegate to machines. You depended on their diligence, their awareness, and their unwavering routine. Their calls provided a comforting sense of order and security, but also a persistent reminder that the night was finite and the demands of the day were always just around the corner. The watchman's final call of the early morning hours fades, a lingering echo of the night's quiet vigil. But as their heavy footsteps recede, a new symphony begins to rise from the waking city. It's one that appeals not just to your ears, but to your nose and even your stomach. The calls and smells of the street. Vendors. For many, especially in bustling urban centers, these were the ultimate multisensory alarm clocks, signaling that the city was truly alive and ready for business. Imagine the scene. You're still cozy under your blankets, but a faint, alluring aroma starts to drift through your window. Is it the sweet, yeasty scent of freshly baked bread? It's the rich, earthy smell of roasted coffee beans, or perhaps the sharp, briny tang of fish being hawked from a cart. These weren't just random smells. They were deliberate marketing tools sent ahead of the vendor themselves, a preview of the deliciousness to come. Then the sounds began. Distinctive, often melodic, calls that were unique to each vendor. Hot cross buns. Get your hot cross buns. fresh milk, fresh from the cow. Worms for your garden, lively worms, okay? Maybe not that last one, but you get the idea, okay? These were not just shouts. They were often practice cries, designed to carry over the general hubbub of the awakening city, immediately recognizable to the sleepy populace. Each vendor, in essence, had their own jingle, their own auditory signature that served as a specific wake-up call for those interested in their wares. For many, especially those who worked from home or had flexible hours, these vendors were a more pleasant alarm than a jarring bell or whistle. You'd know it was time to consider breakfast when the muffin man, yes, that was a real thing, started his rounds. Or, if you were a laundress, you might listen for the call of the rag and bone man to dispose of old textiles. These were not just sellers. They were the pulse of the morning, connecting communities through their daily routes and familiar cries. Historians still argue about the social stratification of street vending. Were they primarily a lower-class profession, or did even specialize artisans engage in street cries to attract customers? It's a complex question that touches on economic history and urban sociology, revealing the intricate web of interactions in a pre-modern city. A quirky tidbit: some street vendors, especially in places like London, developed incredibly elaborate and often poetic cries. These weren't just functional, they were a form of urban folk art. There are historical records of composers even trying to capture the melody and rhythm of these cries in sheet music. Imagine waking up to a performance every morning, even if it was just someone yelling about turnips. It sounds almost quaint, doesn't it? Though I bet if you were trying to get a few extra minutes of sleep, it quickly lost its poetic charm. The street vendors acted as a living, breathing, smelling calendar for the city. Their appearance marked a transition from the stillness of night to the vibrant energy of day. They brought not just goods, but life to the streets, filling the dawn with a purpose and immediate needs. You weren't just waking up, you were being invited to participate in the daily commerce and social interactions that defined urban life. Their calls were a promise of the day's opportunities, a sensory invitation to leave your bed and join the lively current of the world. Outside, you've been roused by the city's symphony of street vendors, their lively calls and tantalizing smells, drawing you into the day. But far from the urban bustle, on the rugged coastlines and vast, unpredictable seas, another group of people had a morning routine dictated by forces far more ancient and powerful than any human invention. The first, light fishermen. Their alarm clock wasn't a bell, a whistle, or even a crowing rooster. It was the relentless rhythm of the tides and the subtle promise of the dawn's first light. Imagine the life of a fisherman in a coastal village centuries ago. Their existence was intrinsically linked to the sea, a demanding mistress that cared nothing for human sleep schedules. The best time to cast nets, to check traps, or to set out for the prime fishing grounds was often dictated not by a clock on the wall, but by the ebb and flow of the tide, or the moment the first sliver of light touched the horizon, making navigation and spotting fish possible. This meant waking up in the deepest, darkest hours of the night was not just common. It was a matter of survival and livelihood. You'd rise before anyone else, probably guided only by the faint starlight or the memory of the moon's position. The chill of the pre-dawn air would bite, the scent of salt and damp earth filling your nostrils. Bellows no gentle transition. You simply had to be up, often hours before true dawn, to catch the tide, or to be the first to reach the best fishing spots before your rivals. Their wake-up call was internal, honed by generations of experience. It was a deep understanding of natural phenomena, the shifting patterns of the stars, the subtle change in the sound of the waves indicating a turning tide, the faint pre-dawn glow that whispered of the sun's imminent arrival. For them, sleep wasn't about leisure. It was a necessary pause before the next demanding period of labor began. You slept when you could, and you woke when the sea commanded. Historians still argue whether the concept of time discipline, as we understand it today, precise, scheduled hours, emerged independently in different industries, or if it primarily spread from the industrial factory model. The life of a fisherman suggests an older, more organic form of discipline, driven directly by nature's unyielding schedule rather than a factory foreman's whistle. It's a fascinating look at the diverse origins of our relationship with time. A quirky tidbit: some ancient fishing communities would even use specific constellations or the position of certain planets as their informal clocks. Imagine checking the position of Orion's belt to know it was time to haul in the nets, or waiting for Venus to appear before heading out to sea. It was a profound connection to the cosmos, far more intimate than merely checking an app. And if you weren't a good stargazer, well, you might be out of luck. You'd have to rely on your neighbor's astrological prowess. The sounds of their awakening would be subtle: the quiet creak of a boat being readied, the splash of oars in the water, the rustle of nets being untangled. There was a respectful silence, a recognition of the sleeping world around them, but an urgent purpose that drove them forward into the vast, open expanse of the sea. Their wake-up call was a blend of instinct, observation, and the hard, cold reality of their chosen profession. It truly was an odd job, or rather, an odd way of life. Where your alarm clock was the very breath of the ocean, you've heard the silent alarms of the sea, pushing fishermen out onto the waves before dawn. Now, let's pivot from the briny air to the intoxicating aromas of baking bread and brewing ale. For centuries, the bakers and brewers were among the earliest risers in any community. Their schedules dictated not by the sun nor the tides, but by the immutable laws of yeast, heat, and fermentation. Imagine waking in a pre-industrial town. Long before the first rooster crowed or the lamplighter made his rounds, a faint glow would begin to emanate from the local bakehouse or brewery. These were professions that inherently demanded an ungodly hour. Bread, a staple food, needed to be kneaded, proofed, and baked fresh every single day, ready for sale and consumption by the morning market. Ale, the common beverage, required careful temperature control for fermentation, and a constant tending of the fires beneath the brewing vats. For the baker, the alarm clock was the rising of the dough. You couldn't rush yeast. It worked at its own pace. So, if you wanted fresh loaves by dawn, you had to start your preparations in the deep of night. This meant rising when the stars were still bright, when the only sounds were perhaps the distant hoot of an owl. You'd kindle the oven fires, a demanding and time-consuming task, waiting for the massive brick ovens to reach the perfect temperature. The baker's wake-up call was the internal rhythm of their craft, a deep understanding of natural processes. Similarly, for the brewer, the alarm was the need to maintain constant heat and monitor the delicate fermentation process. A brewing batch could be ruined if temperatures fluctuated too much, or if the yeast became too active or too dormant. This often meant periodic checks throughout the night, stirring the mash, adding hops, or tending the fires. Their day often began before others even dreamed of rest. Historians still argue about the social status of bakers and brewers in various historical periods, where they respected artisans providing essential sustenance, or merely tradesmen whose odd hours relegated them to a separate social sphere. It's a fascinating look at how different labor schedules influence social perception. A quirky tidbit: in some medieval monasteries, where brewing and baking were often done on a large scale to feed the monastic community and travelers, the monks responsible for these tasks would have specially constructed cells or even small living quarters directly adjacent to the bakery or brewery. This wasn't for convenience. It was so they could hear the subtle sounds of the dough rising, the bubbling of the wort, or the crackling of the fires, allowing these auditory cues to serve as their continuous, informal alarms throughout the night. Imagine sleeping next to a giant, warm oven. Probably smelled amazing. The smells associated with these professions were powerful and undeniable wake-up calls in themselves. The irresistible aroma of fresh bread wafting through the cool morning air, or the earthy, malty scent of brewing ale, were far more pleasant than any mechanical clang. They promised warmth, sustenance, and a comforting predictability of daily life. These were professions that couldn't wait for the sun to rise. They operated on a fundamental need to produce their goods when others slept, ensuring that the community would wake to the essential provisions it needed. Their alarm was internal, driven by the demands of their trade and the science of their ingredients. Literally brought the warmth and the sustenance that defined the waking hours for everyone else. We've explored the demands of the factory, the rhythms of the city, and the unique schedules of specialized trades. But perhaps the most universal, timeless, self-evident alarm clock before technology intervened was one that linked humanity directly to the very source of light and life, the farmers and the sun. For those who worked the land, their entire existence was a dance with the dawn, an unyielding partnership with the rising sun. Imagine life on a farm centuries ago. There's no electricity for lights, no machines to do the heavy lifting, and certainly no time clock to punch. Your schedule isn't dictated by a boss, but by the fundamental needs of your animals and your crops. The chickens need to be let out, the cows need milking, the fields need tending, and all of these tasks are best begun as soon as there's enough light to see and work efficiently for the farmer. The alarm clock was quite simply the gradual, inexorable brightening of the eastern sky. You didn't need a bell or a whistle. Your internal clock, honed by seasons of repetitive labor, was attuned to the slightest hint of pre-dawn light. You might wake before the sun actually crests the horizon, stirred by the subtle shift in ambient light, the cooling air just before dawn, or even the first eager chirps of the birds you heard about earlier. This was a deeply intuitive wake-up. You didn't fight it. You embraced it because your livelihood depended on it. The longer you slept, the less time you had to milk, to plow, to plant, or to harvest. Every minute of daylight was precious, a resource to be maximized. The farmer's existence was a direct, symbiotic relationship with the natural world, and the sun was the ultimate timekeeper, signaling not just the start of the workday, but the very possibility of productive labor. Historians still argue about the philosophical implications of living by solar time versus mechanical time. Did societies that primarily lived by the sun have a different concept of punctuality? Perhaps more fluid and less rigid than our modern interpretations? It's a fascinating debate that delves into the very fabric of human experience and perception. A quirky tidbit: some farmers would use natural landmarks as indicators of time. Perhaps when the shadow of a particular tree fell across a certain rock, it was time to bring in the sheep. Or when a specific star disappeared from view in the pre-dawn sky, it was time to start churning butter. It was a localized, highly personal form of timekeeping, completely integrated into their specific environment, far more intimate than a global standard time. And if it was a perpetually cloudy day, well, then you had to rely on experience, the bleating of the hungry animals, and maybe a little bit of prayer. The sounds of a farm waking up with the sun would be the gentle creak of a barn door, the lowing of cows waiting to be milked, the rhythmic splash of water from the well, the soft rustle of straw as you stepped into the barn. It was a symphony of necessity, quiet and purposeful, driven by the immediate demands of the land and the animals. The farmer and the sun represent the most ancient form of human time discipline. It wasn't an external imposition, but an intrinsic, unavoidable truth of their existence. Their wake-up call was the dawn itself, a gentle but firm command from the heavens, ensuring that the critical work of feeding the world could begin anew each day. We've journeyed through the ages, exploring the ingenious, the natural, and the often uncomfortable ways people were roused from their slumber before the advent of the ubiquitous alarm clock. From the persistent tap of the knocker-upper to the organic symphony of the dawn chorus, each method paints a vivid picture of a world utterly alien to our hyper-connected, digitally timed lives. This final section isn't just about reviewing those methods, but about understanding what they tell us about the changing pace of life. A world before instant gratification. Think about it. Every single alarm we've discussed, save perhaps the most jarring factory whistle, involved a degree of human interaction, a reliance on natural rhythms, or a patience that we rarely exercise today. The knocker-upper was a person, often a familiar face, performing a personal service. The town crier brought not just a wake-up call, but the day's news, connecting you to your community. The lamplighter's fading glow was a visual cue, a slow signal. Even the water in candle clocks required manual setup and an understanding of physical processes. There was no instant set and forget. These methods highlight a fundamental difference in how humanity perceived and interacted with time. Time wasn't just a series of seconds ticking by on a screen. It was a lived experience tied to the sun's journey across the sky, the moon's phases, the seasons, and the collective rhythm of the community. You didn't just know the time, you felt it, observed it, and responded to it in a much more tactile and sensory way. There was a direct, palpable connection between the passage of time and the world around you. Historians still argue about whether the pre-industrial sense of time was truly more natural or simply less precise, making people more adaptable rather than less disciplined. It's a fascinating debate that challenges our modern assumptions about efficiency and living by the clock. Did people simply have more flexible schedules? Or did the very real consequences of missing a tide or a market opening force a different kind of punctuality, one built on observation rather than calculation? Quirky tidbit that really hammers this home. In many pre-industrial societies, the concept of hour itself wasn't fixed. A summer hour, the division of daylight, might be longer than a winter hour because daylight hours varied. This was known as temporal or unequal hours. Imagine having your watch automatically adjust the length of an hour depending on the season. It sounds absurd to us, but it made perfect sense when your life was governed by the available daylight. It truly shows how deeply ingrained our modern fixed-hour system is, and how radically different time, quote, perception once was. The very slowness of these wake-up methods forced a different pace of life. You couldn't just hit snooze 5 times. Key, you woke gradually, perhaps over a period of minutes, not just seconds. This allowed for a more gentle transition from sleep to wakefulness, a period of contemplation before the demands of the day crashed down. It built in a natural buffer, a space for the mind to stir and prepare, rather than being instantly plunged into activity. So, as you prepare to drift off tonight, think about the quiet of your room, the soft hum of your modern appliances, and the easy certainty of your alarm clock. It's a luxury born of centuries of human ingenuity, trial and error. These odd jobs and ingenious devices weren't just about waking people up. They were about how entire societies functioned, how communities communicated, and how humanity adapted to its environment before the digital age. It was a world where time was observed, felt, and negotiated, not just controlled. As the last echoes of our historical journey fade, let the gentle hum of your own quiet space envelop you. The world you inhabit now, with its silent, precise alarms, is a testament to centuries of human striving, a world utterly transformed from the one we explored tonight. You no longer need to worry about a persistent pea shooter or the roaring blast of a factory whistle. Your wake-up call, when it comes, will be your own, a personal signal in a quiet room. Allow the images of lamplighters, town criers and the soft sounds of the dawn chorus to gently recede, leaving you with a sense of peace and a deeper appreciation for the simple luxury of a good night's rest. Drift away now into the quiet, into the comfort, knowing that the world will wait patiently for your awakening.